Welcome to the channel Trimit Color. Today we'll see how to create this bowl of grapes in Maya. In this particular video, we are going to do the modeling of the grapes and the bowl, and we are going to compose it. And in the second part, we are going to do the lighting and shading of these grapes. So let's jump into Maya. I'm starting with a cube, and let's go close and scaling it up a little bit. Going to mesh, smooth, and in the second subdivision level I'm applying smoothness. Let's scale it up in y-axis, and you can see already it is looking like a grape. Selecting the middle vertex and push it inside. Alright, let's select these faces and I'll just extrude it, scale it down. Going to edit mesh and clicking on circularize, and it has been converted into a circle. And you can see I'm getting a kind of organic shape at its top. So this will be the basic shape of the grapes, and later on I'm going to duplicate it. I'm switching to the UV editing mode. Going to create and apply planar mapping. Here my idea is to unwrap this grape and then to duplicate it. Now going to UV and taking 3D cut tool. I'm going to select the edges I want to create my seam. So let's select the edges. Alright, now select all the UVs. Going to unfold and click on unfold, and you can see all the UVs are evenly unfolded. Now going to arrange and layout and clicking on layout. Alright, and you can see the UV shell has come inside the positive space, but still I can see some distortion, and manually I will rectify it. Coming back to my classic layout. Now let's take a cylinder, and I'm going to create the stem. Let's make the subdivision 8 and scale it down, scale it up in the y-axis. Let's insert a few edge loops, and I will change the shape a little bit. Changing the orientation of the grapes also, and I will duplicate it, and let's keep it over here. Changing the size also a little bit. Alright, now selecting the faces of the stem, going to edit mesh and duplicate. Going to edit, delete by type history, and let's make the scale -1. Going to modify center pivot, and I'll just place it at its proper position. Also tweak the vertices a little bit. Let's give another edge loop in this area. I'm selecting these 4 faces, going to edit mesh and circularize. Now I will delete these 4 faces, selecting both the objects and combine. Now selecting both the outer edges and going to edit mesh and bridge, and you can see it has been converted into one object now. Let's give another look in this area to refine the shape a little bit, and you can see now it is looking better. Now going to the hypershade, going to the surface and creating one Lambert, and let's assign it to the grapes, and let's change the color a little bit, making it towards the white, and creating another Lambert and assigning it to the branch and making it a little bit dark, just to distinguish the grapes and the branches. Now selecting the branch and going to the UV editing mode, going to create and planar mapping. Now let's go to the UV and selecting 3D cut tool, let's define the seams. The main reason I am unwrapping the UVs from now itself because I am going to duplicate the models again and again. So later on I don't have to unwrap it once again. So it is a good idea to unwrap these small objects at its initial stage. Of course, when the modeling is done. Selecting all the UVs and unfold. And you can see it is unfolded nicely. I can do a little bit adjustments here and there. So wherever I can see open edges, I am just sieving those. Once again selecting all the UVs and layout. Alright, I am keeping the models like this only for now. Alright, now select everything and Ctrl G to group it and keeping it aside. Once again duplicating the group. Now in the very similar way I am going to create a third grape in this area by duplicating it, and I will connect it with the stem. I am fast forwarding the video because I am repeating the process. Alright, you can see I have already created two variations of it. Now for this also select everything, Ctrl G, and you can see I have grouped it. Now pressing insert in the keyboard and just snapping it at the top. So for this also I am going to do the same thing. After selecting one object, pressing up arrow will select the group, keeping it aside and taking another cylinder. Going to the inputs, making the subdivision 8, scale it down and scaling it up in the y-axis. And basically I'm going to create another long stem. So we'll insert a couple of edge loops and we'll modify the shape a little bit. Now by duplicating it, I will create some more branches, and I'm going to use the same process. After duplicating, I will combine it and then I will just bridge it. Alright, keeping it aside, and you can see I have kept a duplicated object and I'll start working with this. I'm assigning the previous stem material to this. But before doing anything, let's come to this object because we need to unwrap the stem of this. So going to my UV editing mode, let's isolate select, going to UV and select 3D cut tool. and just creating the seams. Now selecting all the UVs and clicking on unfold and then click on layout. You can see it is unfolded properly, and for now I will just keep it like this. Now I will select the group, I'll duplicate it and I'll arrange it around this particular stem. So I'll be using both the branches and I'll create a bigger bunch of grapes. Alright, I have connected it properly. Now selecting the main branch, and I will unwrap this also in a similar way. Isolate select, select all the UVs, click on unfold and also click on layout. Now selecting all the stems together and clicking on layout so that all the UV shells are evenly distributed in this. If you want, you can make the UVs more precise, but for the demonstration purpose I am keeping that part a little bit short. Now selecting all the objects, going to edit, delete by type history and then Ctrl G to group it. Now I am changing the pivot point and you can see I have got another big bunch of grapes. Now come to this object, and my next job will be to arrange all the grapes around these branches. But before doing that, let's unwrap this object. So let's directly go to UV 3D cut tool, and the same thing I'm going to do. I'm assuming all my seams and selecting it. So with the 3D cut tool, wherever I will click, that edge will be opened edge. So all the white edges are actually opened edges. So wherever I think it should be opened, I'm just clicking on it. Alright, now selecting all the UVs and clicking on unfold and clicking on layout. And you can see the UVs are evenly distributed. Just closing it. Alright, now let's arrange all the grapes around these stems. So you can see over here a bunch is ready. Now let's create a new layer and name it as extra and select all these grapes and keeping it in that layer and click it off. Now the scene is looking clean. Going to the hypershade and right click on my white material, click on select objects with material, creating a new layer once again and just name it as grapes and creating another layer and naming it as branches. Now selecting all the stems through the material and keeping it inside the branches and click it off. Now I want to keep the UVs of the grapes in 3 different steps, and for the reason I'm selecting a few grapes, creating a layer and naming it as grapes part 1, save it and add, click it off, selecting a few more, creating another layer and naming it as grapes part 2, add and click it off, and creating a third layer and naming it as grapes part 3 and add it. Alright. So this is my first part. Going to my UV layouts, selecting all the UVs and click on layout, and you can see it is nicely arranged now. I'm just keeping it aside. Now this is my second part. I'm selecting all, clicking on layout and keeping it aside, and selecting my third part, selecting all the UVs and clicking on layout and keeping it aside. So what basically we have got, I'm clicking on everything and selecting all, and we can see all the UV shells. Now I'm going to the texel density. So selecting all, and I'm going to the texel density and clicking on layout. This is the texel density, 12.38. So undo, clicking on get, and you can see it is much more than that. So I will just put 12.38 and set. So this should be the scaling. Now the upper part of the shells, I will keep it at the upper portion, the middle part should be in middle portion, and the lower part should be at the bottom. So like that, I'm just going to arrange it, because maybe later on I'm going to use some ramp or some gradient texture, and it is going to help us. Alright, the grapes are ready. I will just click it off and let's make a bowl. And for that, I'm taking a sphere. So scaling it up. And let's make the subdivision 12 by 12. Selecting half of the sphere and let's delete it. Keeping it on the grid. Now let's scale it down in the y-axis, and again let's place it on the grid. Alright. Now let's insert an edge loop in this area, and I'm selecting this loop and I'll just delete it. Now selecting alternate edges and delete it. You can see all the triangles have been converted into quads. Now selecting all the faces and scaling it down in the y-axis, and you can see how the bottom face has been flattened and it is looking like a ball. Scaling it down a little bit more and once again placing it on the grid. Alright, now selecting all the faces and extrude it, bringing it outer side, and you can see I am creating the thickness of the ball. Now selecting this loop, going to edit mesh and bevel, apply, and let's make the fraction point 3. Alright, now I am going to do the same thing for the inner loop, and this time maybe the fraction will be a little more. Alright. Now selecting the bottom faces and extrude, pulling it out, and I'm selecting this loop, Going to edit mesh and bevel, doing the same thing for this. And you can see I have got a nice base. Now let's go to mesh and smooth. And with one subdivision level I am applying smooth. Now let's create a new layer and let's name it as ball and add it, and let's do the unwrapping of this ball. Going to create and planar mapping. Now let's select this loop and cut it so that the inner side and outer side is different. That's fine. Now the outer faces are selected. Going to create and cylindrical mapping. Complete the 360 degree, clicking on this cross and then scaling the checker boxes to make it even. And you can see the seam is not straight at the bottom. So what I am going to do, I am selecting this edge and cut it, and selecting this edge and sieving it, and now you can see it is straight. Selecting all the UVs and keeping it aside. Now let's work with the inner faces. Going to create and let's apply cylindrical mapping. Complete 360 degree, and once again I will rotate it. I will keep the seam at its previous position and let's scale it up to make the checker boxes even. That's fine. Now selecting the UVs and just flip it. Now you can see it is blue in color, so the normals are fine. Now let's select the center vertex, control right click on it, two faces, and then again right click and grow selection, grow. And you can see how I have selected all the faces from this bottom plane. Now go to create and applying planar mapping, and how nicely you can see I got my UV shells, evenly distributed checkers. Selecting all the UV shells and clicking on layout. Deliberately I kept the UV shells rectangular because later on, according to my plan, I am going to create a pattern by using RAM. Alright, now bringing back the grapes, and I feel the bowl has to be a little bigger. So let's select everything and Ctrl G to group it, and I'll just move it upward a little bit, bringing back the bowl, and let's scale it up. I think it can be little smaller. That's fine. Now my job will be to arrange the bunch of grapes inside the bowl. Now I am selecting the entire bunch and let's duplicate it. And once again I will arrange it inside the bowl. This time my plan is the composition will be some grapes will be hanging out of the bowl and some grapes will be lying down on the ground. So the entire process I am making it a little bit fast forward. you can see again and again I am changing my mind until unless I am getting proper composition. So I think this will be my final frame, and I'm liking the composition, so I'll keep this. Alright, this is it for today. In the next session we are going to do the basic lighting, texturing and the shading of the grapes and the bowl. Hope you enjoyed the session, and don't forget to subscribe the channel for the future videos. Thank you very much for watching.